Child Protection Week. It is a week that is aimed at mobilizing all sectors of society to ensure the protection of children. I just thought perhaps I'll start off by looking at some of the stories that we've covered in the recent past on our programs. Just stories of gruesome attacks on children. Starting here in Durban, which is where I am this morning, there's a story that we covered of an 8-year-old Durban schoolgirl, Nonjabulo Sabelo, who disappeared on her way to school and was found dead in a school field. A detective team consisting of members of the Family Violence, Child Protection and Sexual Offences Unit assembled at Umlazi investigating the murder. You may remember Bobby Bear issued a desperate plea at a time to Umlazi children to be on their guard, that a killer is in their midst. Bobby Bear said they should not walk alone or get into a car driven by a stranger and so on. They printed 4,000 leaflets and distributed them around Umlazi, trying to find this grade 3 school girl. That was before she was found murdered. But there's also another case that we covered, and everyone, in fact, we had a number of programs on this, even Forum at 8. Anan Boyson in Bredasdorp in the Southern Cape, murdered, mutilated at a construction site in Bredasdorp there. And just last week, one of the accused here was released because there wasn't enough evidence against that accused, so said the NPA in relation to that Anan Boyson story. Another story in Naturena, the story of Thandeka Madonsela, 14-year-old raped, mutilated and murdered. That happened in March this year. 2 teenage boys left her for dead in a field after attacking her. Suspects appeared in court some time a while ago. But also, you remember a story sometime towards the end of last year of the 3 siblings in Limpopo: Bafana, 9-year-old, Hosea Gekane, 10-year-old, and the 12-year-old cousin Johanna, who were found by a passerby. They were stoned to death and their hands and feet bound with shoelaces. The girl, Johanna, had been raped before being killed. These are some of the stories that I thought we should start off by looking at and just get a picture of how important it is and how desperate we are in this country as far as trying to protect our children is concerned. Let's talk about that then. Whose responsibility is it, and how do we protect these children from some of this? These are just a tip of an iceberg. I mean, I'm sure if you were to sit and count the number of stories that are being reported where children are the victims, either of prostitution, murder, disemboweled, and all manner of things happening to our children in this country. What is it that we need to do in order to protect them? Let me welcome our guest on the program this morning. Let me start with Richard Muntsu, who's the program manager of Save the Children South Africa, joining us on the line from Limpopo. Let's also welcome Mzolisi Tony, Deputy Director General for Children's Rights at the Department of Women, Children and People with Disabilities.
Yes, we need to protect our children against any form of abuse, irrespective of the kind or type or the size, and ensure that their rights are being realized. One of the key challenges in terms of the capacity to respond, we have a good legislative framework. We have good policies in place, but the problem is in terms of implementation and looking at the issue of women resources. But also remember, it takes the community to raise and protect the child. And part of the problem is that lack of prevention interventions at the level of communities to sensitize them about ways in which they can protect the children, ways in which they can identify forms of child abuse, and ways in which they can report and where to report. A lot of abuses takes place at community level. So it tells you that, yes, to a certain extent, there are still challenges at the community level. But also, some of the abuses are housed within cultural and traditional practices which are not intended, which means there is a need to educate our people, our communities, in terms of what are good cultural practices, which does not compromise the rights of the children, and what are cultural practices that need to be reviewed, so which compromise the rights of the children. So it's a mix of things, but particularly at community level, sensitize the communities, but also ensuring that the communities take a lead and ownership in protecting children against any form of abuse. Yes, that's one of the practical examples. And we are saying our culture is not bad. We are proud about our culture, but let's ensure that it does not compromise the life of children, because as Save the Children South Africa, we really don't compromise when it comes to child protection. issues, and that should be everyone's responsibility. We need to ensure that our cultural practices are done in the best interest of the children and also don't compromise their rights and don't put them at further risk.
During this Child Protection Week, what we also trying to instill in children and in their families is that we need to take full responsibility about our families and about our children as parents. I mean, I am also a parent, and I took my son for circumcision, and government regulation requires me to produce a health certificate for my son before my son goes to the circumcision, and that I'm also expected to make sure that the person who's going to do the operation on my son is a person who's accredited. So there are these processes that are put in place in order for us as families that we take full responsibility, and government would put those things. And it's our responsibility to make sure that our children are protected. So this is why we also making sure that during this Child Protection Week, for instance, yesterday in Durban, children were given an opportunity to demonstrate in terms of what is it that is happening around them when they're at school, when they're with their families, when they're with friends, and what is it? And they came up with a list of things that they think they are supposed to do in order for them to protect themselves. I think there's a collective responsibility. Other than saying we're blaming that government or we're blaming that department or we're blaming that organization. No, I agree with you, Xolani, that government has to take responsibility, but at the same time, we cannot do this thing alone. That is why we continue to appeal that communities, NGOs, and everybody who has a concern with a direct interest on the livelihood of children has to take responsibility. We're not reneging from our responsibility as government.